Welcome to One-on-One with H1. This is our own produced webinar series, and we're so glad to have Stacy Rivkin here. She's our GVP of Strategic Insight. She heads up our Strategic Insights team. And today we're going to talk about the role of medical affairs in impacting clinical behavior and closing care gaps. 3 essential questions. So Stacy, you want to tell us a little bit to start about what your Strategic Insights team does before we dive into the questions?
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm happy to. Great to see everyone here today. Although I'm not really seeing anybody, but I'm happy to have everybody in the audience and really excited to be here to talk about what we're doing at H1. And my team are an amazing group of subject matter experts. They come from a lot of the places where our clients come from. So either from pharma or from consulting, supporting pharma, and they have backgrounds in disease area expertises as well as business expertises. And so they've sat in our client's chair and understood the questions that they're asking. And so they're really able to be a partner with our clients to answer those business and strategic questions and support them through H1, our platform, our data, and our people. And one person on my team has joined, Chris.
Awesome. Welcome, Chris.
Good morning. I'm so sorry about that. Hi.
That's okay. Hi. We're going to introduce Chris Madero. She's our Senior Director of Strategic Insights. And Stacy was explaining what your team does and how you partner with our clients. So because we're talking about the impact of medical affairs, we'll dive right in. So let's talk about scientific share of voice. This is often something that is considered a metric, I think probably an industry standard. What is scientific share of voice?
Thanks, Elizabeth. So when we think about scientific share of voice, what we're really thinking about is how well is your company doing in the marketplace in order to get your company, your drug, your indications heard. And so we look at scientific share of voice across both the scholarly universe of publications, trials, and congresses, as well as the social universe, looking at Twitter to understand how much people are talking about your company or your molecule. And, you know, we think back, I know when I started, it was always a question of who had more posters at a conference, right? So you'd go to the you'd go to the Pfizer booth and you'd pick up their poster book and you'd see how many posters for their drugs that they had at the conference versus how many posters or oral presentations you had accepted at the conference. And we use that to judge share of voice. With those companies that had more presentations, more posters, were getting the greater share of voice. And what's really good now is that we can understand share of voice not only at that one Congress, but across the variety of domains I mentioned, scholarship, as well as social and longitudinally. So we can look and see if your company and your drugs are being talked about more or less over time compared to your competitors.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think maybe what I'll add in too is that when I think about scientific share of voice, I think about it as being really great directional insight on the potential stickiness, right, of a concept or of a drug or of a study or of emerging science, right? And it's not just information that may be interesting to your organization. It may, in fact, be at the very root of the scientific exchange activities that you and your team are engaged in. So if you can have an understanding of how top of mind those concepts are, those particular bits of scientific exchange that you've been very targeted in how top of mind those are with the experts that you've engaged with, it gives you a type of a soft measurement, if you will, about how effective your team is at conveying those insights. And that's really important. That scientific exchange piece is so vital when it comes to MSL activities, right? And to know that you have potentially inspired a conversation that wasn't happening before by looking at the swell of mentions over time is pretty powerful.
If you think about it, like there is such crowded marketplaces where you have a class of drugs and lots of drugs that do the same thing within that class. And really just understanding when we talk about statins, we're talking about Zocor more, Lipitor more, Crestor more, like those things matter. in how we talk about classes of drugs. And the same things matters across all different diseases and indications. Are people, when they talk about the treatments, are they talking about your company and your product?
Sounds like there's a lot of noise out there. So it sounds like it's really important to distill down the right noise to listen to. So that being considered, how do you advise our clients on, or how do you measure, how's H1 go about measuring that scientific share of voice?
Yeah, so we definitely understand that when it, especially in the social sphere, right? You get analysts, journalists, and bots out there talking about companies a lot. So if you just go to Twitter right now and you look up a company name, you're definitely going to find that the HCP voice is the needle in the haystack, because what will really dominate the company or the drug name will be analysts, journalists, and bots. And
Right.
so what we've really specialized in here is being able to weed through that noise and find the HCPs that you care about to make sure we understand what they're talking about. And with that comes a lot of technical expertise that our engineers, machine learning, data scientists put into our insights that power our engines really here to make sure that we are getting through that noise for the people that really matter to your company.
And we've talked about the scientific share of voice, but kind of working backwards a little bit, so kind of an end effect of that is clinical inertia. So can we talk, that's kind of a newer term. Can we talk about what it is?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to take this one, Stacey?
Please go for it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we think about, we know about what the basic concept is of inertia, right? An object in motion or a pattern of behavior either stays at rest or stays in motion until there's some type of an equal and opposite force that's exacted upon it to motivate a change, right? And when we're talking about changing the behavior of clinicians when it comes to their clinical practice, we are, we're oftentimes when we're talking about MSLs and their activities out there in the field, they're either asking a clinician scientist to go from doing nothing to a very specific something because there's new clinical evidence to suggest that a change is warranted. Or we have MSLs that are asking clinician scientists to change a way of operating when it comes to clinical decision making. That is a wholesale shift, right? Because emerging science has taught us that there might be a better way. So I think that when it comes to exacting change to clinical inertia, right? There's a very specific skill that is underpinning that effort when it comes to an MSL, and that is persuasion, right? So I'm going to take you all back to speech 101. We learned about the amalgamation and the emulsification of ethos, pathos, and logos, right? And that is showing up with credibility in front of a clinician to be able to effectively persuade and motivate a change in behavior. And the way that H1 really helps here to kind of get physicians from point A to point B is by empowering the MSLs that are out there exacting education, right? And that is really going to be powered by data-driven insights. And that's where H1 really specializes. So what we're doing with H1 and its platform is putting at the fingertips of MSL and medical affairs teams the insights around clinical patterns of behavior where patients are being diagnosed, or what the diversity mix looks like of patients within specific geographies or within specific physician or institutional practices. What does a payer mix look like? All of those influential stakeholders in the ecosystem are driving in this incredible depth and volume of data that's really nicely structured by H1 and allows those strategically minded medical affairs teams to dive in and really analyze what the marketplace looks like so they can target those conversations so that they're as persuasive as possible.
Sounds like it would be hard to identify that stuff without all of those data elements, like the payers and all of that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Stacey.
I can give you, here's a real world example that I've been working on with a client of ours recently, which is that they have a molecule that they've brought to market, which has really changed the way that a certain hematologic disease is treated. And it does have indication and it does have its place in the guidelines that it should be used as first line with a certain segment of patients. However, inertia is such that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of community oncologists who are still practicing the old way and haven't brought this new modality into their practice. Being able to identify those people based on their behavior, based on what we understand about how they're diagnosing and the procedures that they're doing, can really enable that medical affairs team to understand and target those clinicians appropriately and educate them about what has, their drugs that have come to market that may be life-saving for their patients. And so empowering the team with that information allows them to go in there and put their best foot forward and educate those clinicians with this new information, with the hopes that they can move that forward. Other data points that we can actually also share with them are their networks, right? So by understanding that clinician that might not be practicing evidence-based medicine and understanding who they are networked with that has started to adopt these new treatments, that understands the evidence behind them and understands the benefits to patients, we can also empower our clients and their MSL and medical affairs teams with that level of information so that they can strategically target and work with those people that are going to be most effective about changing that inertia.
It sounds like there's some of the education onus falls on the medical affairs teams to even make the clinicians aware of the inertia. They may not even realize because they've been following the same treatment patterns for a long time.
I'll give you another example too, if you don't mind, if we can riff on this for a bit more, because there are places in which these types of insights can impact earlier on in the development cycle. I'll give you an example. We have a client who is in phase 2 development of a product that is going to be used in a cardiac condition, and it's been identified through years and years of research that there's actually a genetic component to the etiology of this disease, right? And there is a code for it, the testing for that particular genetic condition. And this team is really trying to help the marketplace understand that this genetic anomaly exists, right? Before this therapy can eventually, if it's approved, ever even be used, the patients need to be identified, right? So there is a huge education initiative to help the marketplace understand that this particular genetic anomaly exists, it can be tested for, and the identification of those patients can potentially set them up, as early as in their pediatric setting for potential best care, right? So by helping those that particular MSL team understand which of the HCPs in the marketplace are actually coding for the request for diagnosing or for getting that diagnosis for the genetic anomaly, tells them who's initially even thinking about it. It gives them a place to start, and it helps them to, again, target the conversations accordingly. And you can sort of think about, types. You can already start to think about segmentation of HCPs when you're thinking about a messaging program to approach them with. So those are other ways that we can help teams.
It sounds like that's a good segue into our next question, which is, so we talked about inertia and scientific share of voice. So there's a lot of talk now about MSLs and medical affairs having an ROI or an impact on closing care gaps. And that seems like a tall order. So first of all, let's talk about what is a care gap?
Yeah, so I think what we need to understand when we talk about clinical care gaps are where evidence-based medicine is being practiced and where it's not, and really understanding the differences in those places. So how can we ensure that patients get diagnosed faster, tested for those things that they need to get tested for, and start to get treated based on that evidence? The amount of data that exists in the healthcare landscape is increasing logarithmically. And what's really interesting is that 30% of that data, 30% of all the data in the world is healthcare data, right? So there's such a wealth of information at our fingertips. The onus is really on us to start to weed through all of that information to identify those places where care is not optimized. And the way I always think about care gaps is you want to understand your opportunities as well as your strengths, right? Because you want to know places that are doing the good thing, right? Where are the places where care is optimal, is exceeding expectations? What are they doing differently than the places where it's not? So if we start with, on that institutional level of really understanding where care is being delivered well and where there's room for improvement, understanding the differences between those places becomes our next step.
This is a little off topic, but Duke just released a study where they screened people for SDOH factors early on in the process. And it was just something, example of where it's well done, where it's implemented at the beginning, and they were able to track the outcomes and referrals. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, is if they can have this data partner like H1 up front, what that can have the end result of in the care gaps. Go ahead, Chris, I'm sorry.
Well, I was also going to kind of take it one step further too, right? In the last 15 or so years, the consolidation model, especially here in the United States, where you have sort of the laddering up to these health systems, there's quite a bit of insight too to be derived, not just in the institution level, but on those system entities, those organized customers that potentially have multiple points of care under one umbrella, where pathways are being established, right? And efficiencies are being determined. And if you can also start to ladder up the insights that Stacy was talking about where patients are being treated, potentially optimally versus suboptimally within those institutions, there are also plays to be made, I think, that help organizations target a broader swath of relevant institutions and physicians that practice within them. And that's becoming an increasingly important customer segment, a broader customer segment to pay attention to.
Yeah. How do you address care gaps with our clients?
Well, it's interesting. We recently executed a really interesting analysis looking at this. We had a customer that was really trying to understand where patients were optimally be treated for a fairly rare dermatologic disease, and they specifically had a hypothesis that that patients who were being treated by government insurers were potentially putting an onerous burden on these bigger systems. And so we did an analysis where we were able to determine relative to population where the hotspots for this particular dermatologic disease was being treated in the nation. We were able to identify the top institutions and systems where it was correctly being diagnosed. And we compared that correct diagnosis to an aggregate of claims codes that were kind of felt and hypothesized by the company to be a collection of inaccurate codes. In other words, for years and years, patients may repeatedly go in and get one of these inaccurate codes before they got a correct diagnosis. And it was a really fascinating analysis that showed where you had patients getting the correct diagnosis and where you saw pockets of these aggregated codes sort of happening in swelling. Yeah, and we were able to really help them understand where there was an awareness clearly within certain institutions and certain hospitals where there was an awareness of the correct diagnosis and how to treat it. So what that does is it provides for the client an opportunity to go on in there, and as Stacy was mentioning, have a conversation about, why is this unique claims code being used here, and what are you doing to address this particular unique and rare disease, and how does that compare to some of the rest of the community within which you sit. So it presented all kinds of opportunities to go on in and understand and also target messaging.
Yeah,
great.
I think that that's a perfect kind of example of how H1 is working to overall impact the healthcare landscape and partner with our clients. So we think of this as kind of a continuum, and what we want to support our clients and how we are supporting our clients is with identifying those care gaps, right? We talked about that, finding the places where care is being delivered optimally and where it can be improved. identifying the key stakeholders, right? Those key opinion leaders, digital opinion leaders, treatment leaders, networks, all of the people within that system that are contributing to either the gap or where things are being done successfully, right? So we tend to focus on our platform as an identification tool, but in the entire continuum, once we've identified the gap, identified
back it out.
those people who are in the system, our next step is to really support our clients with insights, right? What's the right next best action? How can we use all of the insights, tools, and learnings to be able to support our clients and their field users to say, here's the kind of thing that is important to talk to this HCP about next. Here's what they did last week. Here's what they tweeted yesterday, and really be able to inform that action on the ground. We like to take a multi-channel approach to this, right? And support our clients not only with those insights, but also with our tools that have the ability to understand what those KOLs are talking about. And when they're evaluating papers with our faculty opinions platform, where we're able to really understand how the KOLs are thinking about the latest and greatest research that's out there. And then finally measure whether or not those activities and those tactics are having an impact on the clinicians we're targeting. And so that really comes back to measuring that impact, seeing where you succeeded, seeing where you still have more work, and kind of repeating the cycle.
Yeah.
Which
And
is
ultimately, I
amazing.
guess, was there a change motivated, right? Was that inertia impacted in some way by the activities of a medical affairs team? And so I think, now we have these tools at our disposal that we did not have before, right? And so we've got this incredible opportunity to get so much more refined in what we measure. And so instead of measuring, for example, the number of times an MSL goes and visits a KOL and hoping that it resulted in the right action, right? You can start to see patterns before that just weren't clear. You couldn't see them emerge before. And now that you can aggregate this tremendous abundance of data and structure it in a way that's smart, in a way that's intelligent, you can start to see patterns that were not visible before. And that's really the beauty of utilizing, H1, right? You can start to see what was not visible before.
Yeah, I have to think it's exciting for you guys and for the client to see the end result on the patient, because that's really what we're all here for. Sorry, Stacey, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I was going to say that, looking at things longitudinally has been something that's really been an evolution in how we're looking at impact, because when we, in the old ways of doing things, where we were sending out surveys, where we were having MSLs record MSLs still record insights, where we're counting MSL insights or visits, we were always kind of changing our sample sets, right? If we sent out a survey, sometimes they had to be blinded. We didn't necessarily know who was responding and who wasn't. The ability to look at longitudinal data and to start see changes over time is so impactful, because with that data, you can go back as far as you need to start from the beginning, really benchmark from before you started working with that core group of clinicians, and to understand from there, how has their behavior changed? Have they started diagnosing this disease more? Have they started doing this test more? Can we look at this cohort and understand more about them? Can we look at them, going back to what you said, asked about share of voice? Are they talking about you more? And then finally, sentiment, right? Are they talking about the things that are important to you? Most of the products I've worked on over my career have always started in a place where they needed to impact the market landscape, where the market was talking about a disease one way, and they needed to educate HCPs to think about a disease a different way. And, the medical affairs pillars were always about educating clinicians on the unmet need, the new ways of looking at this disease, the new ways that you can impact this disease, and looking for that sentiment to start to come through in the literature and then in the social sphere is something that's hugely gratifying when you start to hear your customers repeat back the kind of things that you've been educating them on. So I think about a customer that we have who had a treatment for a disease that was thought of as a nuisance and wasn't considered really something that was a disease, but just something that was that could be treated with over-the-counter medications. And the evolution of the sentiment of clinicians changing from not talking about this as a disease to really understanding that this is a chronic inflammatory disease that there are treatments for that can treat that chronic inflammation and really impact the patients is something you can see over time and really measurable and really impactful. You know, I look at the debate right now on obesity and obesity being recognized by some clinicians as a disease and other people not as, you know, as something that's a lifestyle problem. And you know, I think we're going to be able to see that over time. We're going to be able to see more and more
change in
clinicians
sentiment. Yeah.
talk about things in the ways that our, you know, our customers are thinking about them as well.
100%. And I think what's also really fascinating is when you can build out that longitudinal view and understand over time how that sentiment and how that share of voice kind of ebbs and flows over time, to overlay on top of that the various inflection points that can also be influential. Yes, we started a messaging campaign on educating about the disease state in January of this year, and we can see the uptick in you know, scientific share of voice. Also, we can see, you know, the moment at which data was released at a major congress that sort of cracked the field wide open and changed the way that people practice on a dime. You can start to see where you see spikes in the change of share of voice, right? So you can start to plot those other marketplace pressure points over top of that longitudinal view and start to understand what truly starts to make a difference. And I think that over time, it can really help educate organizations about, you know, what initiatives to potentially pour more weight behind, you know?
Yeah. And I predict that organizations like payers will start to pay attention to that data too, which is interesting because there'll be a more crossover between, which there hasn't been historically. We are almost at time, so I'm going to open it up. If anyone has a question, to type in the chat, and I'll kick it off with a question while we're waiting on people to type. We talked a lot about care gaps and share of voice and inertia. In your opinion, either of you, how does this impact access to care? You think about rural access to care, people that don't maybe have access to the treatment leaders that we're identifying. Can this help with that? Do you think that everything we're doing, the downstream effect on access and equity?
Yeah, so I know that, you know, access and equity is something that H1 is particularly, you know, passionate about. And I think, you know, to the extent that we are helping to empower industry to make smart data-driven decisions on their strategy. And ultimately, listen, we're all in this for the patients at the end of the day, you know, whether it's a medical affairs team trying to get a product through development, an R&D team trying to find the right molecule to even start off into clinical trials, like to find the thing that has the signal, or whether it's another stakeholder in the ecosystem, like a payer that needs to get a product covered. And we are part of the ecosystem in trying to surface data and insights that help inform the process, right? And help inform strategy. I think each of us has a really important role in the chain of custody of this data that's ultimately going to impact the patients. So yes, I do think that this is important. I think that we can't unring this bell that we have now. We know that there is data out there that we can have access to that we just did not have before. And the onus is on all of us to think about the smartest way to empower our strategies to use it, right? And leverage it, right? Yeah. But the 100%. Cupcake that doesn't get eaten. We don't want to leave that cupcake sitting around. we need to make sure that it goes to good use, right?
Any closing thoughts, Stacey?
I think, you know, we've touched on a lot today. There's huge opportunities within pharma and life sciences to really have an amazing impact on patient care. And with the evolution of medicine and medical affairs over the past 2 decades, 3 decades even, we've been able to see the information at our fingertips. And for us, it's really just about digging through that information, finding those relevant insights, and making sure our clients can action on those insights, right? Our goal, especially the goal of the strategic insights team, is to make sure that we're bringing actionable insights to our clients every day.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that the things that we are uncovering are shared with our clients and that they can make decisions and next best steps on those insights.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for joining today. It's been a great discussion. And we thank you for joining us on our one-on-one with H1. Our next webinar is May 24th. If you'd like more info, visit www.h1.co. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
everyone. Bye-bye.